Greetings, my friends. In this video, I wanted to talk about the left's hypocrisy surrounding the N-word. You know, the digger with an N instead of a D. I do realize that it has become increasingly unfashionable lately in right-wing circles, especially among more traditionalistic and nationalistic-minded people, even to talk about the left's hypocrisy. After all, at this point, everyone with half a brain realizes that the left doesn't care about consistency or honesty or truth or anything except power. I also realize that the leftists, being the religious fanatics that they are, wouldn't listen anyway, even if they somehow got their hands on this video. What I'm trying to say is that this video is not an attempt at arguing with them, but rather it is directed towards people who are not yet completely brainwashed and who are indeed still capable of entertaining new ideas, and also for those on the right, in order to hear something new about the issue from a different and I hope yet unknown perspective. We all know the basics about the N-word. We all know that it is a bad word, a curse word, a word that offends and humiliates black people, reminds them of their historical misfortunes and injustices committed towards them throughout the previous centuries, if not even decades. Most of us also know, or at least have heard at some point, what kind of misfortunes and injustices were thrown upon them by the evil and unfair hand of fate, or more specifically, by evil whites. Among these, most prominent are the colonialism, the Atlantic slave trade, the phenomenon of slavery in general, especially in the US, and also every kind of prejudice and racism and segregation and ostracism, and on it goes, you name it. The aforementioned misfortunes have had such a terrible effect on black communities in Africa as well as in the Americas, that according to the apologists of the idea, these communities up until this day cannot overcome these consequences of those actions, and because of that are in constant need of aid, reparations, affirmative action, empowerment, and on it goes. Again, you name it. The situation is so bad, in fact, according to the current mainstream mythology, that these poor black people are systematically oppressed by the wider white society to this very day. The supposed systemic racism on every level of the American and wider Western society is so terrible, so blatant, so intolerable, that it is completely justified to burn whole areas to the ground, to use violence and intimidation if it serves the greater good, if it supposedly serves the interests of the oppressed. The leftist ideologues and their grand forces of BLM and Antifa self-righteously rewrite European history. They are without a shadow of a doubt and without any remorse are taking down or vandalizing monuments. What happens to actual people who stand against this? Well, it is not Soviet Russia yet, but we are getting closer every passing day. After all, the end justifies the means. The oppression must be avenged. The oppressor has to pay. I'm pretty sure Grandpa Lenin would have been proud if he was still alive. Yet there is another group which also had a long and arduous history with slavery, serfdom, historical misfortunes, prejudices, injustices, hell, even communism, and which also apparently has its own quote-unquote racial slur in almost every European language, but somehow manages to exist without constant screeching about the past and violent outburst every time people say the word. If you didn't guess yourselves, I'm talking about Slavs. You know, those strange, a bit backward, mostly Orthodox people from Central and Eastern Europe. I am apparently one of them. And what do you know? According to the leftist priests of diversity and inclusion, we are too now considered people of color, since we are underrepresented and historically oppressed. Don't mind that my skin is probably a lot more white than that of an average American. I guess as a person of color, I am allowed to say the word after all. Honestly, as a Russian, I never had a problem with that anyway, since in my native tongue, the equivalent is the word to call black people up until this day, even though the leftists in my country are currently pushing to make this word a racial slur too, which it never was before. In my language, the word simply does not have the negative connotation it has in many other languages. And the reason for that is very simple. We simply did not have the exposure to black people on a large scale, and as a result, we do not know the consequences of this kind of diversity. Yet we do have actual racial slurs for all kinds of peoples we actually have had exposure to historically. For example, we have a slur for Jews, a slur for Finno-Ugric peoples, a slur for Turkic peoples, a slur for the peoples from the wider Caucasia region. You in the West would probably call them Middle Easterners. Yet they are not as brown as some games, such as Civilization 6 would like to portray them. Hello to Queen Tamar of Georgia. We have all of these slurs, which mostly started as a neutral designation of the aforementioned peoples, yet with time acquired the negative connotations because of the association of these people with mostly negative occupations and actions they were often a part of. For example, our current slur for Jews is Żyd. Is a completely neutral word in Polish language, and it serves as the actual word for Jews. So it was in Russian as well, at least initially. Our slur for the Caucasian peoples, and please do not confuse this with white race, I'm talking here about Armenians, Georgians, Chechens, Dagestanis, Circassians, and so on, and the word itself is Hach or Hachik. It comes from either the ethnonym of Armenians, they call their own country Haik or Hayastan, or from an Armenian given name, which is Hachik. And I guess this name is also in some way connected to their own name, their own ethnonym. Our slur for Turkic peoples, for example, is Churka, and it is most probably nothing more than assimilated to our pronunciation ethnonym of the Turks themselves. You can see the connection here, Churka, Turk. There are also others, but I guess these are sufficient for the purpose of this video as examples. And so we have all these different slurs in my language, and often they're quite offensive. Some are more offensive than others. You can also get into trouble if you call someone like this, especially when it comes to people from Turkic nations or to the people from Caucasia. But with all of these slurs, there's an interesting pattern emerges that is simply not present when we talk about the N-word. You see, not only these different peoples are offended by these different slurs, they also never ever use these slurs among themselves in a friendly manner. You'll never find Jews, Uzbeks, Azeris, Dagestanis or whoever calling each other Żyd or Churka or Hach as if it was a synonym to bro, dude, man, and so on. even when Russian is their only language of communication. In other words, not only are they offended when someone else calls them like this, but even when it happens inside their own group. The words are simply offensive no matter who uses them. This is what I call consistency. I'm still not in favor of forbidding any words, even if they are offensive, but in these cases, you can at least see some kind of justification, some kind of consistency. When it comes to the N-word, the situation is completely different. Not only it is widely used among blacks themselves as a synonym to aforementioned bro, dude, etc., it is also a common knowledge that there are such things as N-word pass, different kinds of jokes and sketches about how whites are not allowed to say the word. There are myriads of rap, or should I say crap, songs with this word being used. And it is also funny how when it is a white college student who simply quoted the lyrics, it is now somehow considered a sin. All these things combined inevitably beg a question. Is it really that offensive then? I don't see any consistency here, even in the claim. All I see is just yet another way to make whiteys feel bad about themselves. Also remember I mentioned that we Slavs got our own racial slur, quote unquote. Well, let me tell you about that, and let us also compare this to the whole N-word situation. You see, in almost every European language, there is an interesting pattern with the word Slav. It is almost always either completely similar to the word slave, or it differs in just one or two letters, while still being etymologically the same thing. The two words are almost always the same or a bit different, but etymologically they are always the same thing. Just imagine that. Every hecking European language has a word that literally is the word to designate a slave, slavery, and everything connected to that. And this word comes from our own ethnonym. Imagine the outrage if this was the case with any other non-white group today. Just imagine that. Yet unfortunately, the word slave came into being and was adopted by most European languages, mostly Western and Southern Europeans, when it was Middle Ages, during the Middle Ages basically. And during that time, Slavs were among the last people of Europe, among the last peoples of Europe who were still pagan, and who were also incredibly numerous. For Turkic and Muslim slavers, this wasn't an issue anyway, because they were raiding and capturing slaves all over Europe. But for Christians, this was an issue, because, well, you see, it is not really cool to capture your fellow Christians as slaves, to take them into slavery. And so Slavs became a pretty good commodity on that market because, well, as I said, we were numerous and we were pagan. So there was no fuss about it. It wasn't a sin to take a pagan into slavery. And well, because of that, because slaves from Slavic regions became so dominant and so numerous on the slave market, the word slave, the word Slav, became synonymous with the institute of slavery itself. And this thing was one of the main reasons that prompted the conversion of Slavic people to Christianity. Because you see, nobody wants to be a slave after all. And so, we have this word in almost every European language. Somehow this word not only has no negative connotations apart from slavery itself, but the fact of its connection to Slavs became really obscure in the mass consciousness. In my humble opinion, this happened mainly because we, Slavs, by our own actions and our achievements, simply did not confirm the negative connotation of the word. In fact, maybe still being less successful than the Westerners, we still managed to achieve so much and create such a perception of ourselves in the wider world that nobody would even think to associate us with slavery and being a slave. Compare that to Africans and their achievements and their actions, and you might understand why the word still has the negative connotations today among every other group apart from the blacks themselves. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe. Goodbye.